routinely recommended for newborns in the early 1990s, the infection has been virtually eliminated in children. Further, thanks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the hepatitis B vaccine has now been given to more than 85% of the world's population. A vaccine against human papillomavirus has resulted in an appreciable decline in the incidence of cervical cancer in several population studies. A vaccine against rotavirus, an intestinal virus that killed 500,000 babies every year in the world, is now saving hundreds of lives every day. In short, because of vaccines, we live 30 years longer than we did 100 years ago. Unfortunately, as is true in a war against any enemy, casualties occur on both sides. We learn as we go, and that knowledge often comes with a human price. Sadly, the story of vaccines is also littered with tragedy. For example, in March 1942, the Office of the Surgeon General noted a growing incidence of jaundice among U.S. Army personnel who had recently received a yellow fever vaccine that contained human serum as a stabilizing agent. The serum had been obtained from healthcare workers at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, several of whom had a history of jaundice, and one of whom was actively infected at the time of the donation. When the dust settled, 330,000 service members had been infected, and 1,000 had died from what would later be called hepatitis B virus. It was one of the worst single-source outbreaks of a fatal infection ever recorded. In 1955, 5 pharmaceutical companies stepped forward to make Jonas Salk's polio vaccine. One, Cutter Laboratories of Berkeley, California, made it badly, failing to fully inactivate the virus. As a result, 120,000 children were inoculated with live, fully virulent polio virus. 40,000 were temporarily paralyzed, 164 were permanently paralyzed, and 10 were killed. It was arguably the worst biological disaster in American history. In the early 1960s, a vaccine to prevent respiratory syncytial virus, a common cause of pneumonia in young children, was made by taking the virus and inactivating it with a chemical in much the same way that Jonas Salk made his polio vaccine. Researchers were hopeful that they now had a way to prevent a virus that killed 5,000 babies every year in the United States. It didn't work out that way. Early studies found that children who were vaccinated were more likely to be hospitalized and more likely to die from pneumonia when later exposed to the virus than those who were never vaccinated. A similar problem occurred with 2 early versions of the measles vaccine, both of which were quickly removed from the market. Knowing that the road to successful vaccines is often bumpy and occasionally fraught with dangers, the development of vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 has, for several reasons, been one of the most remarkable scientific achievements in the past 200 years. SARS-CoV-2 is an elusive virus. When public health officials in China billed SARS-CoV-2 as a respiratory virus that, like influenza, could cause severe and occasionally fatal pneumonia, they had severely underestimated its heinous nature. COVID-19 is far worse than anyone could have imagined. Within a year, the virus was discovered to have several clinical and pathological features that both surprised and confounded doctors and researchers. Specifically, in addition to infecting the lungs, SARS-CoV-2 virus caused people to make an immune response against the lining of their blood vessels, thus causing inflammation, vasculitis. Because every organ in the body has a blood supply, every organ could be affected. SARS-CoV-2 could cause people to lose their sense of taste and smell, often for weeks at a time. Neuropathologists have detected SARS-CoV-2 virus in the brains of some people with COVID-19. Children with mild or asymptomatic infections, who would rid themselves of the virus within a couple of weeks, would later be hospitalized with high fever and lung, liver, heart,